Welcome to this episode of Moments in Leadership. Quick intro thought here. Embedded in this episode is a quick recap of my personal experiences as a reservist with the Veterans Administration. If you are a reservist, please listen to that section carefully, as I feel that my experiences could be helpful to those with reserve time who will be filing a disability claim with the Veterans Administration. Bottom line, as a reservist, you don't get a DD-214 like the folks on active duty, so your medical records are your only supporting evidence that you will have when filing for a VA disability claim. And believe me, I do not wish the administrative pain that I have been enduring since December of 2020 on any other service member. So please pay attention to my experience there. I think it's valuable. With that, welcome to this episode of Moments in Leadership. Here's a quick personal thank you to the new Supercast supporters. I've got Sergeant Major Dan Haber at the Buy Me a Beer level and Ben Meads at the Hot Wash level. Thank you both. Without you and all of the supporters helping out, this will be way tougher on me. You're all proven advocates for this project, and for that, I thank you. I've recorded Brigadier General Val Jackson, and I have that in editing right now. And it's good. For those of you who have been requesting a senior female leader, this one is going to be one that you'll want to hear. As a teaser for you all, I asked her about who she has had as mentors over a career that was dominated with male leaders, and her answers were enlightening and are definitely going to help out leaders across the board. I have some female sergeants major lined up to record this summer, and on that note, if you have a personal connection to make to me for a potential guest, please email me at themilloffice@gmail.com. And that email address is also in the show notes if you don't get a chance to jot it down. You can also DM me on Instagram at themilloffice. And if you like this project, be sure to follow me there too. I'm also on LinkedIn under Moments in Leadership. Finally, a big congrats to go out to Colonel Reggie McClam on his successful tour as the CEO of the Basic School, and well wishes on his move out to the Pacific, where he's going to be doing some great things for country and corps. Okay, with that, this episode is with retired Master Gunnery Sergeant Scott Stalker. Master Gun Stalker served on active duty in the United States Marine Corps for 31 years. And while on active duty, he served as the Command Senior Enlisted Leader for the Defense Intelligence Agency, United States Cyber Command, National Security Agency, and in his final assignment with the United States Space Command. He served in a multitude of locations during his career, which include combat operations in Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, and Operation Silverwake, which was a non-combatant evacuation operation in Albania. In addition to his strategic leadership assignments, Scott served with HMM 365 on the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, Joint Intelligence Center Pacific, 1st Battalion 7th Marines, 2nd Marine Division, Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, 3rd Marine Division, the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command, Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, or MARSOC, and the Joint Staff J2. Master Gun Stalker also has a bachelor's degree in intelligence studies, a master's degree in cybersecurity, as well as an organizational leadership certificate from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He's completed studies at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, where he became a SecDef Strategic Thinkers Program capstone graduate. He currently serves as a senior consultant and executive advisor for several different corporations and is the founder and CEO of S2, Stalker Solutions, LLC. He's a keynote speaker for high-profile events within the federal government, intelligence community, and national security sector, and serves on the boards of several businesses and nonprofits. He serves on the board of directors for the Wounded Warrior Project, Marine Raider Foundation, JCTM, and others focused on intelligence, space, and cyberspace. Additionally, he leads the DoD and intelligence community business development efforts for Clarity Innovations. Personally, this was a great episode to conduct, and I learned a ton, which makes me wish I could have served alongside Scott when he was in. So with that, Master Gunnery Sergeant recently retired, Scott Stalker, welcome to the podcast.
Dave, thanks for having me. Yes, very recently, 15 days ago recently.
Have you gotten used to your first name yet? Or maybe from your background, people called you by your first name a little bit more than in traditional Marine Corps.
You know, I was a Master Gunnery Sergeant, a Master Guns for so long, literally since 2010 up until a few days ago in uniform. And so even though I've told folks that I'm really comfortable being Scott from the most junior private up to the most senior general officer, I still have a lot of people that just know me as Master Guns. They don't know who Scott is. And so, you know, if that's what they prefer, that's fine. I certainly know who that is. But I'm transitioning into being much more comfortable with Scott. I prefer it. I love it. You know, I tell people I leased, the Corps allowed me to lease that position those positions and assignments in that rank. And now it's up to others to kind of wear that with pride as I move on in retirement. So yeah, today, as I told you off cue earlier, I went and got my retired ID card. We're officially retirees.
That's awesome. How long did it take you to get your ID card?
I'm going to be honest on everything here. I anticipated it was going to be painful. I set an appointment for 9:20 this morning. They brought me in at 9:25. My wife and I were out by 9:35.
Wow.
So kudos to Marine Corps Air Station New River. They had us in and out. I didn't ask for any special favors. I didn't get any. It was we were there sitting with the rest of the crew, and I was in and out. So it was actually really painless.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Okay, first of all, your last name Stalker, that's kind of a badass last name. How did you not become a sniper in the Marine Corps? How did you start out in the Marine Corps? How did you end up with your MOS? Talk about some of your MOSs, because I know you've got, an intel background, and a lot of people just aren't familiar with the MOS codes and what those jobs actually do, especially maybe in your younger years. So I'd love to hear, like, how did Scott Stalker become a Marine? How did you become in the intel community? And what were you like the first 4 years that you were in the Marine Corps?
So I always tell people my last name is spelled just like the federal crime. And growing up so I'm from New Hampshire, but I grew up in California when that whole Night Stalker thing was going on. So I was not a well loved individual just for fear of the last name. So I came in 31 years ago, almost to the moment, and I just wanted to go in the Corps, go into infantry, fight, and get into combat. And I obviously came in just after Desert Storm. Hopefully, this doesn't change my discharge papers here, but I'm going to share with you something that I did initially, which was on the ASVAB test. Again, I signed up for infantry option, and so I go in and I take the ASVAB test, and my recruiter said, "Hey, there's a portion of the mathematics test that you'll take that no one can finish, and when you tell me no one can do X, I find a way." And so I wasn't focused so much on getting a good score on my ASVAB. I was focused on beating it. And what that was, it was a timed portion of it. And now I'm happen to be above average in mathematics. And so I was taking the ASVAB, and you had like 5 minutes to do it. And this was back, number two pencil, you got to fill in. So I figured out that every time I filled it in, it was going to take me just under a second, and there would be no way to do it. And so instead, what I did is I just saw the question, hit the dot, and I just dotted everything instead of filling them in. And then I went back later, as they went to grammar or some other portion of the ASVAB, and I filled them in all the way. And so when I got the test, in some ways I kind of cheated it. So please don't change my DD 214. But I found a way to beat the test and got the perfect score on the math. And I think what that did is then, as I'm in boot camp, my senior drill instructor, then Sergeant Lang, who went on to be a sergeant major, pulled me in and said, "Hey, they want you to go test for this intel thing. How can a knucklehead like you get intel?" Which I certainly was. And so I ended up taking this other test at boot camp, and they said, "Hey, we're going to put you in intelligence." And it was going to intel without the Aston Martin and the James Bond tuxedo, but that was my pivot into intel. And I think it was because of me trying to be challenged on the ASVAB. And so I then went to Intel school in Virginia Beach. And, I was 17. I maintained a bit of arrogance. I graduated high school early. Academics were easy. And so I lacked a work ethic. I'd never had to put effort into anything in my whole life up to that point. It came easy. Even in boot camp, I showed up, I was running like a 17:30, 3 miles. Like, things were easy as a young kid. And so when I got to Intel school, I graduated dead last in my class. Dead last. And, so if you look at someone who later went on to be our first senior enlisted leader in the Marine Corps for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency, you wouldn't say that's the roadmap. Finish dead last, and then you get to go on to do some great things later. But that was a wake up call for me that I needed. I really needed that. And my senior, my two staff NCOs who I still stay in touch with, Ron Proctor, Tom Woodard, shout out to those gentlemen. They pulled me aside. And then later, my first NCO here at MAG 29 in New River, they pulled me aside and said, "You're going to be a really good first term Marine, but that's about all you're going to be if you don't start putting in the work." And I did. And I went balls to the wall, literally. From that point, graduating as a PFC, 18 months later, I was a Sergeant E5 because I took on all these boards. I was meritorious Lance Corporal, meritorious Corporal, meritorious Sergeant, super fast because something switched in me. And I realized that the Corps is not going to change for me. It's not going to wait for me. I better show up and perform, or it's going to be a quick 4 and out. And all of those lessons were critical for me. And I think the other piece of that really helped shape me later was I wasn't going to deploy. This was well before 9/11. I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was at MAG 29 at the headquarters, and there wasn't going to be an opportunity to do anything. But I was preparing. I was asking the brief, the commander, doing the intel reports in the morning, locking myself in the vault, doing the intel prep of the battle space, like all the things you had to do because there wasn't anything real going on, if you will. And then an individual over at HMM 365 got injured in the S2 section. They said, Stalker, you're going. And so I went over to HMM 365 and we rapidly deployed with 26mu. We found ourselves doing the 50th anniversary of D-Day, 6 June 1994. We got to do that. And we saw, the Queen and President Clinton and those folks. And shortly thereafter, we found ourselves in Mogadishu. And so all of that was because really I started to perform. I started to do well. My gunnery sergeant recommended that I replace the injured Marines there at 365. And that was one of the greatest assignments of my life. And I heard a podcast you did with General Heckel previously, and he talked about that command. I was in that command as well. We had General Sturdivant there. We had, Fuzzy Headland. General Headland was there, who was for a little bit of time my intel officer. He wrote my first fitness report. And then we had an exceptional sergeant major who I still stay in touch with today, Ron Kirby, and just great leadership there, great opportunities. But I think the smack in the face that I needed was that reality check from the Corps of, hey, we don't care if you're not going to put in the effort. You're going to get left behind. You better shape up or we're going to ship you out. I saw the writing on the wall. I was counseled that I was going to be heading to cook school if I didn't. Nothing against that, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so the Corps in my first 4 years really, really helped me with great leadership. I got to see great leadership. I got to see great leaders, and then later serve with them many times on down the road as well.
I didn't know that you were in Somalia. I was too. We didn't talk about this in pre-meeting. This never came up. Were we there at the same time? I was there December 92 through February or March of 93, I think.
No, we were there with 26mu after the Black Hawk Down situation.
Okay.
And we were really there to provide logistical support to the Army. And so we were flying in. I was also a machine gunner on a CH-46 and part of the air crew. That was another thing, another opportunity there at 365. I had a chance as an S2 clerk to go and become an air crewman. And I did that and qualified, got my wings. And so we got to fly in and out of Somalia and, providing support there, logistic support. But again, that was all, taking advantage of that opportunity. And you had asked me about the MOSs. Sorry, I kind of went on
it's okay.
a tirade there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I had the 0231 MOS as an intelligence analyst. And when you get promoted to Master Gunnery Sergeant, you end up taking on the 0291, which is kind of all of the ints together, geospatial, counterintelligence, HUMINT, all source, and we kind of pull them all together. And then one that I'm also very proud of is this thing called 8071, which when I was at MARSOC, and we can talk about that if you like, we created the Special Operations Capability Specialist through a rigid training pipeline, physical, mental, proving it in training and exercises and earning that MOS. So I'm really proud of that 8071 as well.
And was that an enabler MOS from the operations standpoint? Is that what that title meant?
Yeah, so it's one of the enablers, so to speak, if you will. What I would offer is the way it was set up when I was there, and I was at MARSOC from 10 to 14. It was more of when we do missions, we weren't going to try to do the same way as NSW, as the SEALs, or as USASOC and the Green Berets. It was we wanted to add something different, and so our intel professionals were trained to the high standards, physically, mentally, with weapons, all of the above, so they can execute missions at the smallest element, at what we call the direct support element, 2 or 4-man teams there. And it's evolved since then as combat has evolved and as our deployments have evolved and the requirements from SOCOM have evolved. But yeah, that 8071 is a bit of that ultimate enabler.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I definitely want to come back to your MARSOC time. I bet you we
Sure.
can play a little bit of quick who do you know there. But curious, going back to your first 5 years, you had a really fast career to make E5. So I've got to imagine that, meritorious corporal, meritorious sergeant. Did you say meritorious lance corporal too? Or
Yes.
yeah. So, okay, you must have had some great mentors. You must have had some people who are setting an example and really encouraging you to excel in the early part of your career. Talk about some of those aha moments that you had in the first 4 years of your career, that were really formative, that you look at, up until you retired, like that was a part of my leadership foundation that carried through my entire career.
And when you ask that, I instantly think of names, those names of individuals who helped develop me. I still think of Sergeant Lowe, who was down in the S3 shop. I think of Captain Al Ziegler, who's no longer with us, who not just taught me what it was like to, to be an intelligence professional, because he would say, "Hey, this is what we're looking at for as pilots." And this was a captain talking to a PFC, and he didn't need to do that, but he did. He invested in me,
Mhm.
and I look to him as more than just an officer, but a true gentleman. He's someone I miss dearly. But I think really the majority of my education and training and development was because of my sergeant there, both Bob Howard and Chris McEntee, and the investment my sergeant major had in me. And I learned so much from that because it didn't just stop at meritorious sergeant, which, I was 19 years old when I made E5. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. And quite frankly, if I could have slowed it down, I probably would have, but you get put up for these opportunities and you execute. That's what Marines do. And we step up. All of those individuals helping to develop me. The one thing that I took with me all the way through my career is individual investment. And Ron Kirby, I mean, this is the squadron sergeant major who also went out and got his aircrew wings, who was, at 8th and I redeveloped the silent drill platoon and all of the things they did. I mean, this guy is the creme de la creme of leaders. But I saw firsthand, because he grabbed me, and he did this with officers, he did this with senior enlisted, privates, whatever, invested in them. And so my kind of aha moment was, wow, if I want to get to that level, I have the gold standard of excellence here. And what it takes is not really focusing on you, but pouring into others. And so I really tried to do that later on in my career when I was in charge and I had opportunities, whether it was at 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and just kind of having hip pocket classes and talk to them about how the intel we're providing to the line units, to the companies, matters and what they need and the context behind what they need, to later when I was at the combatant command level and really just holding 3 and 4 day classes with my folks, both officer and enlisted. I thought was incredible. But the other thing that I saw Sergeant Major Ron Kirby do that I think is a bit of a lost art, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone or any institution here, was I saw him focus on developing officers as well. I took a mental note of that because I realized as a senior enlisted, as staff NCOs especially, we don't just focus on enlisted, or we should not. We focus on Marines, and that includes officers. And so as I grew up later in 7th Marines and going to Iraq multiple times and everything, I really talked about not just leading down, but also leading up and leading those officers, advising them, developing that trust with them. So they knew, I could come to pick my rank at the time, whatever gunny, master guns, doesn't matter, and confide in Scott Stalker. And he's going to give me his honest opinion. He's also going to trust that the decision I make is well thought out. And I think that was the thing that I learned and I observed from Ron Kirby. I saw him do that with our squadron commander and just the incredible relationship he had with our CO there, Lieutenant Colonel Gator Duncan, who was a great commander. But I saw he relied on the sergeant major, which in an aviation unit can, at that squadron level, might be a little unique because oftentimes you're focusing on flight hours, and so you're down with the maintenance guys. But it was because of Ron Kirby investing in those officers, investing in the commander, and investing up and leading up, that I really learned a lot. And I think that's one thing that we got to take on as staff NCOs more, is not just developing our enlisted Marines, but truly investing in our officers as well, because they deserve it just as much. And the Corps deserves it because they're going to go on to be Again, I named off three individuals, whether it was Headland, Heckel, or Sturtevant, and my squadron level. They were O3s and O4s when I was there. They went on to be general officers. I mean, Heckel's still, a 3-star now, and Headland made 3 stars too. So, we have to invest in them as staff NCOs. And I saw that. I saw how important it is. And I think it's critical that we return to those roots where it's missing.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that too, because a lot of the feedback that I get on this podcast comes from younger officers, and then occasionally, but not quite as often on the same comment, from NCOs saying that when a guest talks about the dynamic between a staff NCO and a young officer, it's really valuable for them, because if you're a student at TBS, if you're a brand new lieutenant, and maybe even if you're out in the fleet for your first 6 months out in the fleet, you're just trying to pick up on every single tidbit you can to be the best that you can be. Because here's the surprise to the enlisted guys out there and gals. I'm sorry, from New Jersey. It's that every single officer that comes to a command, and regardless of MOS, they all want to do the best job they can do, because they just went through hell for 2 years probably to not only graduate college, but get out of OCS and get through TBS. And you don't do that much work and want to come and be a piece of shit at a unit. So just everybody needs to know that. So I always say that, okay, here's the other thing. Unless there's some secret society that says, hey, you can be an honorary sergeant major or an honorary NCO, I'm never going to be able to say I was an NCO or a sergeant major. So my only perspective is from an officer. But, and I say this all the time, like, I would think that if I was a corporal or a sergeant, I would see it as a badge of honor if I helped a second lieutenant or a first lieutenant be the best officer they could be, and they became a general officer one day. Because nothing is more influential in a lieutenant's life than those corporals, sergeants, and that platoon sergeant that they have in their very first command. Period. End of story. It's probably more valuable than anything they learn at TBS. And so officers will always get, look, we all get it. You're going to make fun of us. You're going to say that we're lost. We don't know how to use a compass and everything else. I dare anybody to go through TBS and pass the land nav package who says that to a lieutenant, but I get it. And we all get it. And we expect the ribbing and kind of appreciate it in a weird sort of way. But if you really do have if you ever see a bad officer, I would offer that if there's a bad officer out there, I can point to probably a lot of bad NCOs in his command too, who are not helping him or her be the best that they can be. And so I'm sorry with that big, long diatribe. I'm wondering if you can we stay on that for a second and maybe share some of your experiences on that, and maybe give some advice to the young enlisted Marines that are out there, because you do seem like you have a lot of experience with officer development.
I was put in places that allowed me to have that opportunity. I'll go back to 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. I'm a young staff sergeant there. I'm the intel chief at the battalion. I've got a company commander at H&S who is just remarkable. You can see it in him as a captain. He's going to be a general officer. A guy named Kyle Ellison. We may have heard of him. Exceptional leader, commanding McWill right now.
Got to get him on here. Yeah.
Oh man, you could charge me for that episode. I'll listen to that one. Just a remarkable leader. But right after 9/11, I was at the Staff Academy 3 days out from graduating. Graduated, came back to the unit, and we all thought, hey, just grab your rifle, we're going to war. We don't know where we're going to war. And then 1st Battalion, 7th Marines gets orders to Okinawa. And so, this is literally months after 9/11. We go to Okinawa, we do our thing, which is, as you know, exercise, come home after 6 months. And I made the mistake of getting selected a gunnery sergeant. But before I moved on to 7th Marines, I was still at 17, and he had moved on to be the weapons company commander. And because we had a relationship there built on trust, he reached out to me instead of an infantry staff NCO. And I don't know if he asked me or told me. It doesn't matter because I did it. But he brought me on to help build this non-commissioned officer leadership kind of infantry academy where we were going to make fast decisions in training. In lieu of having officers there, we were going to run it as NCOs, in some ways, focusing on mission command, executing at the small unit level. And that opportunity to lead an infantry organization, a battalion at the company level, really, really hard to come by. Normally, that's going to be an 0369 staff NCO. But because I focused more on trust and development of an officer and could care less about my fitness support or anything there, it was just, doing the sets and reps, adding value. And over time, having a great officer like my company commander, then Captain Kyle Ellison, I got the opportunity to do that. And I think if more staff NCOs, more leaders would focus more on wherever they are, just making the fighting whole better, adding value, leading up and down, and by example, you're going to find those opportunities there. And I think General Heckle touched on this in his podcast with you, where you can smell those that are kind of fake out there that are, hey, I need to get a better fitness report or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was always about, let's just do this. Let's be excellent at whatever they gave me. And he gave me this opportunity to kind of run some logistics and some of the infantry courses there. But it was really precepted years prior by working together, by building trust. And with that trust came many other opportunities. Later, him and I were on at 7th Marines in Iraq years later. And so, it wasn't just an exercise. It was truly being able to later execute this in combat as well. The lesson that I picked from that moment in leadership was dominate your battle space, whatever that is. If you're an admin clerk, if you're, and really professional SOF operators will tell you this all the time. Whatever your MOS, whatever your job is, be excellent at that. Improve yourself, your fighting position, those around you. Opportunities will come because you're going to build that trust. So that's kind of how I felt that one there as an example. And that later led on to more opportunities down the road as well at 1st Marine Division and other places.
Yeah, it's awesome. I got to tell, if you're listening to this, just rewind back the past 90 seconds and listen to that again. It's so true. If everybody was just the best that they could be at the job that they have, the impact they're going to have across the board is just huge. Forget enlisted officer. Like, just forget that for a second. Just in the human domain, the impact that you're going to have is so massive.
I see it also as a retiree now. And, as a consultant and doing work, dominate whatever you do, add value to the company through performance and trust, and you're going to get more opportunities as well. And so it's not just in the Marine Corps. This pertains to business and the private sector. It's to dominate your battle space, whatever you are given. And I was asked to be an O231, an intelligence specialist. That's what I did. And I tried to do that as well as I could, adding value to then, if, not to use the customer term, but it was really the infantry. I'm in an infantry battalion, and making sure they had timely and accurate intelligence. They had someone they can trust and go to. And we had that great relationship forged together, in different exercises and deployments to Okinawa and other places.
Yeah. So I'm curious, with all the successes that you saw early on in your career from a leadership perspective, both officer and enlisted, how about some failures? Did you see anybody? What I'm really trying to get at here is, can somebody learn from a story that you have or an experience that you have on somebody who didn't live up to their expectations in a leader or failed, and what somebody can take away from that story to improve themselves before they end up in a situation like that themselves?
Yeah, so I think maybe moving on a couple years from where we were in this previous point, let's go to 2003. I'm a gunnery sergeant, 7th Marines. Literally the day of the Super Bowl, Raiders, Tampa Bay Bucks, we land in Kuwait, LSA 7, nothing there. And when I say nothing there, I mean there was dirt and that was it. There wasn't a head, there wasn't MREs, there was nothing there. We get there and we know why we're there. We're gonna, likely invade Iraq, and we're gonna move on and execute the mission.
You came off a MEU? You came off of the ship?
No. I was with 7th Marines. We just flew in.
Flying force.
Yep. We flew in and, the bus there and the whole bit. So thanks for our logisticians for getting us there. But we then went through a series of training vignettes and exercises, gathering intelligence, preparing. But the one thing we didn't do probably enough was the basics and fundamentals within the company, within the headquarters company for 7th Marines, because even though we were providing intelligence to the regiment, we were also going to get in those vehicles and move. And we were also going to man a weapon. And we were going to, shoot, move, and communicate just like every Marine. And so as we got started, and I remember crossing the LD and Safwan Hill and the whole bit, we're pushing forward. I noticed that our company commander was struggling with some of the land navigation challenges and the communication challenges. instead of me running up there, I was a fairly senior staff NCO in the company because we kind of had a forward and a main, so we were separate a little bit. What I ended up doing was getting the comm chief and say, hey, if we don't fix this, we mean two staff NCOs, this captain is likely going to get relieved quickly. We may suffer battlefield casualties, and we got to do this. Let's figure out a way to instill some pride in him, instill some confidence in him, and pull him off to the side and talk to him about, okay, is your crypto load done properly? And how to effectively communicate. Do we have all of the comms set for him? And let's rehearse it. And then the land navigation things, the basics, let's make sure we got the checkpoints on there and put it there. And so this was two gunnery sergeants coming together, talking off to the side, because we wanted our captain to succeed, but we also wanted our Marines to live and to come home alive. And this was a serious moment in combat as we're literally invading Iraq, days into this thing. And it was going sideways. It wasn't as smooth as it should have been. And so we were able to do that and successfully get to our end state there in Baghdad and secure our sector. But had we not done that, I don't know what would have happened, but I don't think he would have stayed as the company commander because, at the time, we didn't have time to fail, especially at that level. You can't have, convoys that can't make it, can't communicate with higher headquarters, lower subordinate units, so on and so forth. And so I think that was a moment where, a couple of staff NCOs looking out for their company commander, but also knowing that if they didn't, all the Marines beneath us would suffer, and having some battlefield success there.
That's an interesting story, because there's so much about leadership. Like trust really isn't talked about all that much, and how you gain and earn trust. And if somebody got relieved in the middle of a situation like that, like a real life situation, there's just not enough time for the greatest leader in the world to even come into a unit and take over and build the trust and confidence that the Marines need to have, that they need to have in each other. And you probably averted a disaster with that decisive action between you and the gunnery sergeant.
Yeah. And I also think to the XO, who was a senior lieutenant, but a senior lieutenant. And, he had
the senior lieutenants.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I think the other element of leadership, at least in the Corps, that is not touched on enough, that isn't mentioned, it's a bit taboo, but I'll throw it out there, is love. And I genuinely loved our company commander. He was a nice guy, a good guy. He probably didn't go on and have a very senior career. I don't know where he ended up shortly thereafter, but I gave a damn about him, and I did love him as an officer. And I also knew that our XO, who was a senior first lieutenant, was still a senior first lieutenant and did have a lot of experience. And so I'm thinking through this, and oh my God, if our company commander fails, he's an ex-Marine up. Where's his stress level? How's he focusing? How's he sleeping? How is he preparing? Not that we had, hotel beds to sleep on or anything, but we're still human. We got to think of those things. And so it wasn't just taking care of the company commander, but it was trying to maintain the headspace and timing on that XO so that he was able to do what he needed to do and the company commander was able to move on. But the word you touched on, trust, is incredibly important. Also, I offer that love is as well. And, as a father, I think of leadership and love. I love my daughters, love my wife. When it comes to my daughters, occasionally they like to throw a monkey wrench in things. And so there's an accountability piece to that in leadership, because I love my daughters. I'm going to hold them accountable. I'm going to praise them in public, so on and so forth. It translates right into the Corps as well. And I loved that company commander, loved the Marines that he was in charge of. It was, critical that he succeeded. His success was our success.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with us. I'm wondering if I can kind of continue on with that and phrase a similar question, but maybe have you look at a different point in your career. But I like to ask people to tell me a story about the best lesson they learned from their worst leader. And it doesn't mean that the worst leader was a terrible leader. I just mean that sometimes personality conflicts or whatever it was. It can be any of those sort of things, but anytime somebody has and I had them in my career and I learned a ton of lessons from them. I'm wondering if you have a story like that you can share.
So there's three individuals, I won't name them,
Yeah, please.
that I would probably never work with, for, or around in the same state ever again in my life. One staff NCO and two officers. I'll tell you a story that is marginally fascinating, but I'll get you why I share this story. After I left 7th Marines, I did 2 deployments to Iraq with 7th Marines. And then I got orders to an organization called the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command. And this organization basically was to go to Laos, to Vietnam, to Cambodia, and to look for remains. Okay, I get orders out there. I'm assigned to the Lao team. That's how they pronounce it, Lao team, the Lao team. And so we're going to spend an awful lot of our time in Laos. I'm the assistant team leader. My team leader is an Army Ranger captain, and I've got a lot of fit, lean, tough guys on my team. Myself and one of the other Marines on the team, it was a joint team, we ended up going through a basic dive school because there were streams and areas that we were going to have to potentially go in to find remains or parts or whatever. And so we went through all of that. And then we had a challenging mission that we knew is going to be really, really hard. And one of the officers that was in a higher level position was just driving me nuts, really, really bothered me. Couldn't stand to be around him. He was focused on what I'll call symbolism over substance, and making sure that all of our reports going up to the general officer looked beautiful. But I was focusing more as the assistant team leader that we were getting stuff done, getting shit done, and getting the job done that was necessary, because we had that sacred oath to make sure that we returned our service members, our soldiers, Marines, whatever, home to their family and provided closure. And so as this officer was driving me crazy, I came up with an idea. I talked to my team leader and I said, why don't we bring him out from Hawaii and show him this mission and bring him out on this mission, and maybe it'll change his perspective on things and it'll give him a different idea of why we need certain equipment like machetes, why I had to go to chainsaw school, why I had to go to air assault school to rappel out of helicopters and all these other things. And he said, good idea. And so we get this senior officer to come out with us. We're flying in an MI-17 helicopter in a village there in Laos. Myself and the sergeant, we rappel down, not very high, but just, 20 feet or so out of the MI-17. We get the chainsaws and we clear out the LZ so we can land both the AS-350 helicopter, which my commander's in at the time, and then the MI-17, which is a much larger helicopter, so they can land, and then all the rest of the team can get there. We then make our way to the site after we machete our way through. And if you've been in Vietnam or Laos, you know how hard it is to navigate the terrain there, how tough it is. And we finally get there. And at this point, there's two of us that are trained to go into this stream to get there. And all the time I'm thinking, he's seeing all this. He's seeing how hard this is and how tough and challenging it is. Maybe he's going to change. And so we finally, myself and the other Marine, get into the stream there. We're looking for parts. We're going down. We find a few things. We bag it up and later give that to the other team for forensics. But when we come out, from literally head to toe, we are covered in leeches all over our body. And we end up doing what we've got to do. Me and him right there in the middle of God and country, stripped down, and we do leech checks and we check each other. He's got one in his eye. I've got one on my butt cheeks, and so forth. We look it over, take them off, clear. We go back to the house after it's all said and done. And usually we do our after action. We'd have a beer with one of the local little tent villages there or something. And then we'd be done for our day because we had to finish at 5 p.m. Later the next day, that officer came over to me and he said, I get it. I see I know why you brought me on that mission. I understand. I need you to be a little more forceful now with me, because I'm still going to be tough on you because I've always seen this in you. I expected you to kind of stand up to me a little more. And so I thought about that. I thought, wow, was the whole time he was being a bit of a jerk to me because he expected more, or was he just really a jerk? And the whole time that I'm running him through, the jungles of Laos, and doing leech checks with a teammate, was that because I wanted him to change? I later saw him years later in Hawaii, and not that we're bros or anything, but I think we came to an understanding there, and it was all because I was trying to check my boss's boss, he was trying to check me. We had to put those egos away to get something done. And the only way I can think of it is take him through something extremely challenging and really, learning lessons from him. So, long story there, but sometimes it takes embracing shared hardships together to really come together to bond. And in this case, that's exactly what was necessary in order to forge forward. And I think, the remainder of my time there, we were always from that point forward ranked, the best team, the number one team, because we were getting things done and taking on the hardest missions in Vietnam and Laos and even Cambodia. So yeah, that was a story there for you. Hopefully that was what you wanted.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, but what was the lesson? What was the lesson that you can overcome some personality conflicts between senior leaders by sharing difficult, tough experiences? Or is the lesson, hey, keep your ego in check,
Yeah.
or maybe both?
I think the lesson is we're not authorized to quit. We're not authorized to fail, and we're not authorized to fail our people. And I was not going to be in a situation where I could relieve that senior officer. He certainly wasn't going to get the best of me and get me off the team because I was able to do my job well. And so I think the lesson was we need to figure out I need to figure out, because I'm the junior, how to get this to work. Because the stress was coming
Okay.
back on my company on my captain. The stress was coming back on the rest of the team. They did not like this officer either. And so I was trying to think through, how do I get this officer to see the challenges we face? Because he's off in the headquarters in Hawaii and not understanding how it is out in the field in the real world. And so I think there was just an opportunity to bring us collectively together and to really get our leader to understand what we're doing and appreciate that, and for to get him off our back a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I wish young First Lieutenant Dave Armstrong had learned that lesson about how to deal with difficult leaders back when I wish I had heard that lesson 30 years ago.
Sometimes it takes leeches.
A lot of this project has just really made me realize that how much more I could have improved myself had I been aware of myself. Sorry, that's like a moment there, my confession.
No, it really isn't. I think you should never stop thinking that way. The 80-year-old Dave reflecting back on you currently is going to say, man, there's a couple things I could have done better. And I'm not just talking about putting more money into your stocks in the right stocks, but we're always seeking self-improvement. And at the moment you stop, I think that's when we're truly dead.
Right. Well, I mean, being self-aware of my limitations is why I have a wife.
Yeah.
She's very good at telling
Yeah, you and me both.
where I need to improve.
Yeah.
So yeah. But real quick, sorry, just kind of micro question there on that. Were you successful in retrieving the missing service member?
I would say 95% of the missions we went on led to nothing.
Oh, really? I would have thought it was the exact opposite.
Well, so when you start getting into DNA and then mitochondrial DNA, which is from the female side, and I learned an awful lot about this. The soil in Southeast Asia, the places we were operating in, is very acidic, and so it's very hard to find an awful lot. What my team was able to do on that 30-day mission was to recommend a couple of places for the other teams to start to excavate, and so that's when you have the technical experts will come in, set the conditions, dig for 30 days, and then find the bones. And so we were able to find success in terms of recommending 2 sites for excavation. And then because we were so
Oh,
backlogged, it would take a little over a year to get there. But I had several missions where we did find, ultimately, because of our investigations, led to the recovery of remains and closure for a family. And that was always awesome when we would do those dignified transfers
mm-hmm.
in Hawaii and return those remains to family members. That was great.
Wow. So sorry, another micro question. Just you've really piqued my curiosity here because I really don't know a whole lot about this, but you're helicoptering and you're cutting the landing zone down. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but where does that tip come from? Does some villager say like, yeah, I remember back when this helicopter crashed here or so? Because I feel like we should know all of that already. Sounds like we don't.
When you start interviewing people that about things that happened decades ago, memories fade, people die off,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to reinvestigate. What we would do prior to our missions, before we would load our gear and go into Laos, is a lot of prep work in Hawaii. So we would study reports, we would read previous investigations, we would read about the battlefield areas we're getting ready to operate in, and make assessments
Mm-hmm.
on where, based on where the team has looked, where we should look as well, who we should interview, and go from there. It's very, very challenging when we're doing that. Some folks don't trust us. They didn't want to talk to us. Others would give us information that was, not a good lead. And so you'd go back and forth several times. And then sometimes people would have something and they'd want to have you buy it for them. Hey, here's a helmet. And, we didn't have authorization to do that. We'd have to give that to the embassy and allow them to think through how they're going to do that. But it's not as easy as you would think, given the fact of the terrain, the soil, the elements, the lack of memory because they weren't there. They haven't been there for 50 years or whatever. It was really unique.
Wow, it's fascinating.
I can tell you one of the more exciting times on that job. I was in an MI-17, and you think through the Vietnam War, two different sides dedicated to killing each other. I'm on an MI-17, and I have both sides at one point from the Vietnam War, both Americans who fought there and North Vietnamese soldiers who fought against us there, and there was a brotherhood. It was long past from the days of fighting, and so you saw one of them helping each other off the helicopter. We knew that we fought because our governments were at war, but we were able to, as I'll just use the term, as soldiers, if you will, come
Hmm.
together and try to find these remains. And that was one of the greater moments of that entire assignment.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Thanks for sharing that with me. I appreciate it. I know we spent some time talking about, best lesson you learned from your worst leader, but it prompts me to want to ask you if you can reflect on yourself and remember a time where you did something wrong. And what did you learn from that? And was it early on in your career, or even would be more interesting really to listeners, did it happen later in your career? But any time where you had done something wrong and how it was handled by your command, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, it was arrogance and hubris, and these themes play throughout my life and my career. A little later, so in the middle of that assignment I just talked through at Joint POW MAA Accounting Command, I got a call from headquarters of Marine Corps. Hey, we need you to go out on a transition team to Iraq. We need you to go back to Iraq. And so I executed that. I checked into Second Marine Division. I was kind of there in name only because we basically checked in and left. And so I meet my team. We were assigned to Tikrit, 11 other Marines, myself, and a corpsman. And our job is going to be to operate outside the wire 6 days a week, come back to Camp Spiker, one day a week, shower up, get cleaned up, and go back out and operate outside the wire. And so when you do that every single day, and we were there deployed for 13 months, you start to develop habits. Sometimes you develop bad habits. And there was a moment where I was the senior enlisted of the transition team. Our team leader was a lieutenant colonel, a sensational officer. Like the whole team was really, really great. But we had gotten to a point where we were just snap and pop. We just knew, what we needed to do. And so one day it was going to be the enlisted only that were going outside the wire to execute because we had got this and we met the minimum requirements to do that. And so I was going to be in charge. And I decided we're going to rush through our comms check. We're not going to, we all know how to do this. Everyone knows how to load crypto by now. Everyone knows how to do Roger over, Roger out, the whole bit. We know how to do this. And so, hey team, let's just get out there. Let's just go. Just as soon as we get out there, we have a moment, and as we move out, it's probably about a 25-minute patrol, 4 vehicles. We're getting outside the wire. We have basically an option to go left or right, and we would always change that up just to keep the enemy guessing which way we're going to go. And so as we're getting out to the headquarters on patrol, the rear where the officers were, they had done this on purpose. They were going to test us, and we were going to try and do a comms check to see if we can do a simulated medevac. And they had coordinated with the air. Well, safe to say, we fundamentally failed that rehearsal, that medevac, because of me, because I failed. I was arrogant and I thought we already know how to do this. Not necessary. We know what we're doing. We're all professionals at this point. And so when I came back, I had that good hardcore counseling. But it wasn't the counseling that really hit me. It was the team was disappointed in me, and I had let them down, and that really crushed me. And so I learned from that was the basics and fundamentals, and this is going to apply as we get more and more focused technologically on conflict in the future. The basics and fundamentals, you can never shortchange those. Radio checks, side alignment, side picture, like the basics things that we've got to be able to do, map and compass, you name it, are critical. You got to check your arrogance. And I think the one thing that I also learned from that is I might have set the conditions where others on the team, I was that senior gunnery sergeant, weren't going to tell me that, hey, wait a minute, you should pause. And so I reflected on that I got to make sure I set the conditions where junior folks, junior enlisted or junior officers will come to me and say, hey, you're making a mistake. We need to do it this way, and have the moral courage to do that. And so there were a couple of errors there. One is just being so arrogant, I didn't execute the basics of a comms check and making sure we were ready. But also, I didn't set the conditions within the organization so that people would come to me and say, hey, Gunny, you're wrong. We need to do this. This is real, and lives depend on it. But I learned that lessons, luckily not the hard way. Luckily, we didn't lose anyone, but it was that necessary reminder. And years later, as I've talked to some of them, I've stayed in touch with a few, I'm grateful for that lesson that they taught me, because it was kind of in that middle of the deployment, that 7-month mark, 8-month mark, where you're starting to get super arrogant and, others are ripping out, but you're staying a little longer. So you know it all. Well, you don't know it all. I didn't know it all. And I made those mistakes. I learned from them, and I guarantee you it didn't happen again.
That's interesting you say that, because I can reflect back on my career and see times where I thought like, oh, I'm too good for that. I'm too experienced for that. And I get it. It brings me to that point in the movie Black Hawk Down where they're in the chow hall and the ranger captain says, hey, soldier, why is your weapon not on safe? And he says, this is my safety right here with his finger. Remember that scene?
I do.
Okay. In a movie, that's like oh, what a badass that guy is.
Yeah.
In reality, that's an example of exactly what you're talking about. Like, you think you're so good that you don't have to not that really happened. Maybe it did, but it's those kind of things. It's those when people, I feel like when people lose sight of the basics, that's when the problems always happen. Yeah. And that, I think it's just human nature. You're right. I think it is hubris and ego and things. And that's where you get into these debates of, and look, I'm not going to come down on one side or the other on this, but it's just an example of like, why is it such a big deal if we have our hands in our pockets? Why is it such a big deal? Why do we have to do close order drill? Why is this important? Well, in a way, it's sort of just like training you to be brilliant in the basics. Doesn't really matter what the basics are. It's more of a mental standpoint, a mental frame, mental perspective than it is an actual perspective. And that's why I think leaders kind of harp on all of those things, which, and for anybody that's listened to the General Furness first episode where he talks about his reasoning behind implementing the basic daily routine at 2nd Marine Division, I mean, that's what he was getting at. Wasn't received very well. Get it, talked about, go listen to that episode and hear it. Yeah. But yeah, I think those overlooking the basics are always the catalyst for big errors. But it also brings me to a question that I think is really interesting too, because you said you spent time in MARSOC and you spent time in this highly specialized unit. You spent time in the intelligence community, and then this team that you were on in Iraq too. I'm curious, most leaders of all ranks, they want to come into a unit and improve it. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with it. And leadership and the role of the leader seem to be a lot clearer when you have a poorly performing unit, right? It's easy, like, okay, this is all messed up and I'm going to fix it. Fine. We've all been there. But how do you lead an organization that's already hyper optimized and everyone like, I'm thinking about a MARSOC unit, and I'm just making the assumption that this is true, but you've probably got a collection of the 1% of the 1% are in there. They're probably hyper optimized, hyper trained. You don't have to worry about anybody failing the PFT there. How do you lead an organization that's already so good? Or do you actually lead it? Does it just lead itself?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of and I'm going to get this slightly off, the Steve Jobs quote where he talks about, we don't hire people and tell them what to do. We hire great people so they can tell us what to do. Some of that I felt at MARSOC, and I was in a unique role there in 2010 that has evolved today. It's not quite what it was then, but a little bit I'd like to touch on too about what we just talked about. I always remind folks that you joined the Corps didn't join you. And so now I can put my hands in my pocket. I'm a retiree, but I think it's more than just drill. It's more than just those things. It's the discipline. And that discipline, that battlefield discipline, I believe is necessary. It's what sets us apart as Marines. And so, yeah, I think we're always going to complain about the hands in the pockets. We're always going to complain about close order drill and these other things. If the Corps stops complaining about that, we probably have another problem. But why we do that is critical, and it's important to good order and discipline, to small unit leadership. So on to MARSOC. When I was there, I served as both the intelligence chief, the G2 chief, as a master gunnery sergeant from 2010 to 2014. But I also had this role they called as the functional capability manager, meaning that I managed, and for lack of a better term, I basically said yes or no to 383 professionals. If you wanted to come to MARSOC as an intel person at that period, I was the approving authority to say yes or no, not the officers, but for the enlisted, and which was predominantly the force. And I had a lot of friends reaching out to me. I had a lot of individuals that wanted to come there, and I took great pride in this. And this was something I had to learn to tell folks, no, you're not good enough. There's a standard, and the standard then it was like a 235 PFT. So nothing you should be on accident able to get a 235. If you're in basic shape and not injured. At the time, we were also looking for those that had a couple combat deployments, and that was not hard to find at that time. And so when I have a pool of individuals all running 285 and above PFTs, all super stallion studs in their MOS, proven in combat, I had to do something else to look for what I was looking for. I learned this after we eventually failed some folks. And so it wasn't battlefield success. It wasn't physical fitness, because my goodness, we were doing boots and utes, run, swim, runs. You could not out PT anyone there. It was character, and really looking at the character of the individual. So talking to their officers and staff NCOs, are these individuals that are one man, cowboys? Are they off on their own? Can they work well with a team? But it always came down to those that we either didn't bring on board, or those that failed out in some manner had a character flaw. Never once did I have to ask someone to leave because they didn't know their job exceptionally well. Never once did I have to get anyone out of there because they couldn't do a pull-up. It was always a character issue. And I think, as you think through a lot of the issues and challenges that maybe the larger Marine Corps has, I think by and large, it's probably the same if you were to, kind of build that out. It's more on the character issue. If we can get those basics and fundamentals down correctly, treat everyone with dignity and respect, have discipline, obey the orders, and so on and so forth. The training, I can teach anyone to put a round down range and hit the target. I can teach anyone to put their head above a bar 10 times or 20 times and do pull-ups to run faster. I can teach you your MOS and how it fits into the greater context of executing operations. But if you got a character flaw, that's a challenge. And we can get past that most of the time. That person has to want it. And the ones that we let go, and some we had to even process out of the Marine Corps, always were character issues.
Interesting. You said something that has generated a question about issues that are facing the Marine Corps at a larger level. Because you just retired as Master Guns and Command Senior Enlisted Advisor, leader, advisor or leader, Command Senior Enlisted Leader or Advisor, what is the proper terminology there?
I don't know this is doctrinally written down anywhere, but it's took on the term the CSEL, the Command Senior Enlisted Leader.
Okay.
Prior to that, it was like SCA, and I don't know when it changed to CSEL, but that's more of the known term now.
Okay, I think that's why I get it mixed up. Okay, so, and having served up through that, what are some of the issues that the Marine Corps is facing right now from a leadership perspective? Hey, Osprey, we don't have enough howitzers, we're doing the wrong thing for tonight. That's not the question. The question is, from a leadership perspective, what are some of the challenges that the Marine Corps is dealing with right now from your perspective? And probably more importantly, what can someone listening to this right now do about it?
I have great trust and confidence and faith in the leaders in the Marine Corps. I say that genuinely because I would say it if I don't. Exceptional individuals. My biggest concern when I see the comment on the Marine Corps is the hug he's going to put on me is going to probably crack a rib, because he's just such a dynamic leader. Same with our Sergeant Major in the Marine Corps. What I would offer is I know that they know this as well. And this, again, we could use more money for this, or, the barracks.
Sure.
And Sergeant Major Ruiz talk through that. I don't need to touch on that. We understand that. And that's in some ways outside of their issue. The one thing that I would offer, if they brought me on board and said, hey, what are some things we need to look at, is I think we got some terminology wrong when it comes to talent management. I think we need to focus.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I would
Okay.
offer that I think we need to focus more on talent utilization. And I know there's a nuance there, and you can pick me apart, and someone can go to the dictionary and say, hey, that this means that or whatever. But talent utilization means that there's a vision, there is a plan, there's a thorough thought through this, right? So, for example, I've had a couple of enlisted Marines in my days, exceptional. They went to Naval Postgraduate School out at Monterey. I've had some that went to the National Intelligence University, get their master's degree, their bachelor's degree. And because I was in a unique situation, I was able to kind of chart where they went next. But if we're truly utilizing talent, we send them to that school to get their master's degree. And we say, any enlisted Marine that graduates this now goes to the 3MEF G3 or, MAR 4 Pack G2 or whatever. But we don't have that. We don't have that on the enlisted side. And I think if we really invested and utilize that talent instead of try to manage it. Because what we do now, and the monitors will tell you that, when Staff Sergeant Smith, which is a generic name, O2 whatever, is up for orders, there's here's some openings, here's where you can go. Instead of, wow, Staff Sergeant Smith just finished his time at the Joint Intelligence Center in Hawaii, now the Joint Intel Ops Center in Hawaii, we could really use that talent at 1MEF, at 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, or whatever. We don't do that very well. I would love to see us get more into the utilization of that talent and thinking 2, 3, 4 tours down. What ends up happening is you get Master Gunnery Sergeants and others who love these folks and know who they are, who I would often call the monitor and say, hey, Smith needs to go here. Jones needs to go do this. And even with officers, I mean, I was literally 2 days ago talking to an officer about an exceptional opportunity they're going to go take on and the power behind that. And I think that would be where I would focus more. I think we're doing a great job. Our recruiters, I mean, my goodness, if I could, I'd give them larger bonuses for the job they're doing. Our drill instructors making
Mm-hmm.
Marines, as long as we never drop the standard there, and I hope to God we don't. I hope we only make it harder when we can. We will always have the right product. Now, in order to retain that product and to really give them a kind of a vision into what they can become, whether they want to take on opportunities like I have or others, is how do we utilize the talent through a professional management process, understanding the schools they went to, the investment the Corps made in them, and where we need them to go next. Because then they can also kind of plan too. And so a lot of that overlaps with talent management. I understand that. But I would implement more of a talent utilization process.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now I'm kind of curious about, you talked about your MARSOC time and the leaders
Yeah.
there, and it was character, but you've got a lot of leadership experience in the joint community, but specifically Spacecom, which essentially didn't
Yeah.
exist. And then all of a sudden it exists. As a Marine, or I don't care how you answer it, but I'm assuming you're going to take it from the perspective of a Marine. What were some of the leadership challenges that you saw in that command that you were completely not ready for? Not only not ready for, like you weren't prepared for, but like you didn't expect to encounter it. And what did you learn from another service as a senior leader? What did you learn that changed your mind about maybe the way the Marine Corps does business?
Yeah, great question. I was at Fort Meade. I was a senior enlisted leader for National Security Agency and Cyber Command, assuming my career was going to be done because normally if you serve for a 4-star as a COCOM C-cell, which almost doesn't happen anyways, that's pretty much it. And so I was finishing up there, and then literally we reestablished the United States Space Command. And a few months later, they stood up the Space Force. And so you have a combatant command headquarters and you have a new service. And at the time, then Sergeant Major Marine Corps Troy Black said, hey, Scott, you're going to compete for this. And I got the opportunity to compete and get the job at Space Command. So I find myself out there at Space Command, and I kind of had some flashbacks to the micro level of things I did as an intelligence professional and seeing it there as well. An example was
Mm-hmm.
we would often have these gatherings, these advisory group meetings of intel professionals in the Marine Corps, and we would get together and pick apart the problems, solve the problems, and come up with the solutions. And I always thought, wow, this is fascinating that we are doing this as Intel professionals, talking to Intel professionals, why are we not bringing in our infantry officers, our fleet commanders, like people that are going to use our information instead of this self-licking ice cream cone? And so when I go to Space Command, I see all of these space professionals talking to space professionals. And I'm talking to the commander, my boss, and others, and saying, hey, we really got to get the joint force to understand what we can provide to them so that they're asking the right questions, they're training in this environment, they're exercising. Because a lot of the theories, and these are theories because they haven't happened yet, but the idea was going to be, if we get into a conflict with China or Russia, the first kinetic strikes they're going to be launching are going to be to take our space-based capabilities out so that we can no longer see, characterize, and understand the threat, so we can no longer communicate effectively. All of those things that we've got to do, and we become more of just an air, land, and sea force, vice a true all-domain space, cyber, air, land, and sea force going forward. And so I really just started, again, having those flashbacks of Intel people talking to Intel people and then seeing space people talking to space people. I just set it upon myself, talking to my boss and saying, we have got to really, really switch this out. Our success needs to be when we have division commanders coming out here, when we have pilots coming out here, when we have logisticians coming out here, fleet commanders, and so on and so forth, educating and informing them. And I did my best to do that, and we kind of took that on, but it was really the blinding flash of the kind of the obvious there of, wow, why are all of these people? And the other part about it too is, if you know space at all, you know that almost everything we do is a SAP, a special access program. So it's even worse because no one can even know what you're talking about, and we need the warfighter to understand that. And so I was so happy when the Corps and the Navy stood up MAR4 Space, Navy Space, because we have components. We created maritime space officers. I didn't do it. The Corps did, and the Navy did, and they understood the investment in this. And if we're going to be successful from the MEF level, MAR4 level, down to the squad, we've got to have those non-space operators understanding space capabilities. I don't need them to be master space operators. I don't need that. I don't need to be master cyber operators or any of that either. But they need to understand all of those domains and how it impacts their ability to operate, and maybe how we can use that to shield their movement, how we can do that to hide, how we can do things in the electromagnetic spectrum, and a lot of other things that get into a kind of a classified conversation. But this is critical. And, I know what, General Glavy and General Heritage and those leaders in the Corps are doing, and I'm solidly behind them. I think we're doing the right thing. But we've got to flip it a little bit more and say, hey, I need the non-space people visiting Space Command, understanding what we do. I need Space Command out at all of the MEFs, and we're doing that. I'd love to see it execute a little bit faster. I'd love to see it really, really play out in exercises and training so that we can understand how we're going to adapt and overcome through some of these challenges in space and cyber.
Let's just say a unit is going through a training exercise in MTX or something at 29 Palms. Let's just say a big division level training exercise. How should a leader be thinking about asking the right questions and incorporating that space domain into a training exercise, which really traditionally, when I close my eyes, it's more about dusty trails of convoys and machine gun ranges and artillery going off and some close air support, right? Because that's what I see when I close my eyes at 29 Palms. So if that's me, how do you get somebody like me to say like, oh, and we should also be thinking about, because how do you incorporate space into 29 Palms into a train exercise?
Right. I was out there 2 weeks ago, actually, doing some consulting work.
Okay.
Out at both Pendleton and 29 Palms for some business. But I went out there once as the senior enlisted leader for Space Command. I went out to 29 Palms, and I was actually pleasantly surprised and impressed with how they had incorporated space into their exercise. They had brought out, I won't say the company, they brought out a commercial space company as well to support them, so that if our network went down, they had an alternate. They had a captain and a staff sergeant. I remember sitting there with the commanding general and sergeant major as they're giving this presentation, talk about how they were going to use their signature. So think, the radios and everything that kind of emit energy and can be targeted by an enemy. They were going to use that in a manner to get the adversary to think they were somewhere else, and allow them to maneuver without, kind of in a no-com manner. And so they had thought through.
So like spoof, it's like spoof the
Yes.
signals.
Right.
Okay.
And
Wow.
so they had thought
Brilliant.
through all of this. Our cyber operators at the time were doing some things as it relates to getting into networks, and I'll just leave it at that, so that they can impose battlefield effects if the commander chose to do that. They had an entire information plan instead of reacting to adversaries, which was unfortunately a lot of what we do. They were putting out messaging, shaping the environment against an adversary and a populace as well. So we're doing this. And when I say what leaders, when we start talking lieutenants or captains or whatever, or quite frankly, even, colonels or whatever, I don't need them to be so concerned with what's going on in space from a perspective that they need to be doing things, but they need to know who their maritime space officer is. They need to understand how that joint force can be supported, and also how things can be degraded. So I would hope prior to all this, they were getting good intelligence briefings so that they understand that the adversary is going to try and jam our networks and make it challenging for us to talk, that they're going to try and jam our ability to navigate, our GPS satellites. So back to the basics and fundamentals. How are we doing this at sea? How are we navigating at sea? How are we executing MCON emissions control? How are we, using a map and compass? All those basic things.
How are we laying a howitzer?
How are we laying a howitzer? Like
Just,
all those things.
I mean, just to throw my community into it.
Unmanned platforms, you name it. I would hope that before they go to the field and start thinking about that, way before that, they were getting the briefings, not just on the tech that they're going to have, but the threat. And then how Space Command, how Cyber Command, how the joint force can help them in their ability to maneuver, in their ability to execute whatever their mission is, whether it is to locate, close with, whether it's to, do some deception ops and hang out over here while the main effort goes over there, whatever. All of that needs to be integrated, into the MAGTF, quite frankly.
Interesting. I want to stay on this for a second. And the question may sound, your response to my question may be like, well, isn't that what I just talked about? But bear with me, because I think there's a bigger answer here. But what do you see coming in the future that our current talent needs to be weighing carefully from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. You asked a question earlier as well, and I didn't say this specifically, but what I would offer is we need to find a safe space. And I don't mean it in I mean it in a different manner than is traditionally meant, but a safe space for our Marines to break things, to test toys out, to play.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an area that I have started to take on myself as a retiree. And that's the area of large language models, machine learning, or what's more commonly known as artificial intelligence. I'm telling you, I have started playing with this. I have, my master's in cybersecurity, and so I have a basic understanding of a lot of this. I am seeing the advancements of technology every single day so rapid, it's unbelievable. And we need to be able to utilize this, the ability to go through terabytes of data instantly and provide a commander with options in nanoseconds. If we think about the ability to do command and control of hundreds, if not thousands, of unmanned platforms instantly, I think it's in the area of augmented or virtual reality and in artificial intelligence. We need to invest the talent to play with these toys, to break those toys, to learn from those toys, to bring those after action reports back to whether it's McWill, MGySgt, you name it, and make sure we are able to incorporate these technologies and understand how to use them, but also how do we advance our own capabilities through them. Now, I don't think we're going to, let's clear out all the regiments and divisions and battalions and just move on and be a bunch of AI geeks and that's how we're going to fight. No, but it is the future. The reality is that's where technology is going, and we should be using it to our benefit, but also understanding how our adversaries are training with it and their capabilities there as well. I think virtual reality, quite frankly, is going to replace a lot of technology in the future. We will no longer, probably in 10 years, if not sooner, need a television, need a laptop, need a phone. You're just going to put on the goggles. I hope they're going to be lighter and smaller, and they likely will, and cheaper.
Yeah.
You're going to put those on, and you've got your big screen TV there. You got your computer there. You got everything there. And all of this technology is going to continue to advance. It's going to make training opportunities more realistic, more challenging. And so if I were able to, and I can say this ignorant of the challenges that the commandant has with our budget and the things that he's able to buy, but if there was an opportunity to invest in those areas, I would double down there.
Just in my civilian life, I'm already looking at how can I invest in those things to replicate environments that my clients sit in on a daily basis. We're asking this question in it's easier for me because I can just say like, oh, that thing costs $5,000,
Yeah.
just buy it. Right. The Marine Corps just can't, I get it. It's not as easy, but yeah, I'm thinking about those things too. And people talk about artificial intelligence. I look at it as like, well, it's not so much artificial intelligence to me as it is artificial assistance.
Yeah.
It's the decision making. It's helping the human make a better, faster decision with more information, with more clarity than it really is about this intelligent thing operating off on its own, like the Terminator.
Right. I think, now is the time for leaders to get smart about this. This is kind of akin to us being in fourth grade mathematics, and we're just starting to get a little bit more advanced. And if you aren't on the ship now, next year, when I've got you in calculus 2 or some more, discrete mathematics or some of the crazier things we've got to do for coding and computer cybersecurity, you're not going to be able to get on the train because you didn't get the basics. If I was able to, I would say, senior leaders of the Corps, let's get an executive level leadership artificial intelligence class out to all of you, so you know enough about this to be dangerous. You know what questions to be asking. You have an idea of how to utilize this at the MEF level, division level, whatever. But those are the things that I would be thinking through. And you can get those basics relatively cheap to start to ask those questions, so that when the commandant's looking at a couple of budget years out, we start talking about tools and toys. It's already kind of muscle memory for him, and he understands what we're thinking about, or quite frankly, the commandant's replacement, and that commandant's replacement as well. We're thinking through this. We're not going to have the luxury of deciding what the future operating environment is. I don't see a future operating environment that doesn't have large language models in it, machine learning and artificial intelligence. It has been said, World War III will be fought with sticks and stones. And I understand that perspective. I know what we're talking about there. But leading into any type of conflict, I just don't see a future where artificial intelligence doesn't play a key role. We need to invest in it now. We need our leaders to understand it now so we can start playing with it in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. So at what level do you think is the right level for a leader to start saying, okay, now I need to educate myself on this? So is it important for the second lieutenant to understand this, or is it important for the major? Is it important for the sergeant to understand it, or is it the gunny and the master sergeant? Like at what level? Because does an infantry platoon commander need to understand that? Or does the infantry battalion commander need to understand that?
I'm certain someone will cherry pick my answer here, but I would offer, of course, everyone needs to understand it, just like I need to understand helicopter operations, logistics, and so on and so forth. However, I would offer probably not the lieutenant, probably not the captain, at least to a degree of detail. I need them to focus on the basics and fundamentals of leadership, of leading the Marines, whether it's at the platoon or the S1 shop or whatever. Just be exceptional at that. And after you've mastered that and maybe have executed a PCS or two at the field grade level, and probably more seniors in the staff NCO ranks, I think we now have to have a level of understanding. I would offer, probably, if you were to line everyone up at a battalion today, pick any battalion, you probably already have a lot of expertise there at the junior enlisted and maybe even the junior officer level.
Yeah, I'll bet.
You don't even know it.
And
so this is the part where we've got to be able to utilize that talent and understand what we have. And again, offer them that safe space to utilize this, to play with this, to break it, and then to come back and to brief their commanders and say, here's how I was able to shut down your entire network by X, Y, and Z, or shape the opinions of the locals, or maneuver using space capabilities. All these other things it's really, we just have to unleash these guys. And I know it's hard, right? I get it. We all have a TEEP. We got to execute the training plan. Units are coming and going nonstop. PCS cycles, all these other things. All I'm offering is that there is no future that doesn't have large language models and artificial intelligence in it. It's just not gonna. It's not reality. That's where we are going as a society, as a force. Unmanned platforms, undersea, on sea, you name it. And now is the time to get the leaders to understand that area and the domains that it operates in. Otherwise, we're going to be playing catch up.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to see us learning on the fly in the middle of the next conflict with people dying like I see on videos on social media of what's going on in Ukraine right now with drones. And it's just, I really hope we learn how to fight that war before we're in it and we're learning OJT. Really hope that. I know. So I definitely want to spend some time on your experiences getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps, so that the prepping to get out, getting out, and now you're out. And I'm going to come back to that. But I've been kind of saving this one little micro question for you. It's a huge pivot from what we were just talking about. But I read in your bio, and you mentioned it earlier, that you went to Pathfinder School, not a school that a lot of Marines get to go to. And the reason I'm curious about your answer on this is because I went to U.S. Army Jump Master School. So I've been to a lot of Army schools like artillery and tanks, right? So I kind of understand the Army and the way they teach things. I found so much value in the way they teach their schools, which is completely different than the way we do it too. I'm wondering if you look back on your time at Air Assault School. What did I say? Air Assault? I meant Air Assault School. If I said
you said
different.
Pathfinder, and I was worried that you pulled that on Wikipedia because I don't put anything on Wikipedia.
No. I'm sorry.
Air Assault.
I made a mistake there for listeners, and I'm not going to edit that. So I'm eating that. So Air Assault School. I've heard that's not an easy school. I think there's a lot that goes on there. Was that an eye opener for you? Was that interesting? Did you walk away from an official Army school like that saying, wow, I really learned something there? Not technically, but like personally.
Well, there is some technical to it as well. Kudos to the United States Army for putting that school together. I was afforded the opportunity to be a standby entrant into what was then run by the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii, as I was at the Joint Task Force Full Accounting, and I was, Joint POW MIA Accounting Command. Sorry, they changed names as I was there. But I was a good standby guy, and I wanted to go for a variety of reasons. Namely is because there's a rappel piece to it, and I needed that for the missions I was going to be executing in Laos and Vietnam. When I got a chance to go, day one is almost just kind of a haze X, if you will. And so it was a bit humorous for me as they're yelling and screaming at me and shoveling dirt at me as I'm doing push-ups, because I'm cracking up laughing because I know what's going on here. I had been through this before. It's literally, I mean, you take any human and you say, do push-ups. Eventually there's a point where you can't do another push-up, and then run, and then, all these other things. And so that's what we were doing to start with. Oddly enough, some people decided, hey, I'm not doing with that. And they dropped out. There was no way, first off, I'm a Marine. There's no way I was going to quit. I'm going to get through this. And I didn't know exactly what I had got myself into. But I remember the last event we completed there was the 12-mile, 3-hour ruck march.
I've seen that on YouTube. Yeah, it doesn't look easy. Yeah. Honestly, I got to tell you.
The terrain's a challenge. I was a bit silly. I took off in a sprint. I wanted to be first. I didn't come in first, but I tried. We had a couple of second lieutenants that were faster. But the point is that I was taking it on. And what I loved about this, at the 3-hour and 1 second point, anyone who didn't come in after that, you did not graduate. There was I saw officers who didn't graduate. I saw enlisted that didn't graduate. The standard was the standard. The Army held that standard, and I appreciated it. So we had to do quite a bit of things. We had to do, the first week was a thing called sling load, where we are learning how to put, boxes and logistics together and containers and whatnot, and have a helicopter come in, pick those up, and then take them to point X, whatever. So we had to learn that. And then the next week was heavily focused on different knots, how to tie those knots, and then literally rappelling. And so doing all of that was important. But I think the outside of the brotherhood and the bond, and I remember the first time on the rappel tower, we had a really good back and forth with me and some of the instructors, and they're like, "All right, you got to sing the Army song, or we're just going to drop you." not like drop you from the course, but from the rappel tower,
right?
So there was a good ribbing back and forth, and I loved it. I would sing the Army song with great pride, and I told them when I graduate, they're going to sing the Marines hymn. So we built that bond together. And oddly enough, when I got to crit years later, I was supported by the 25th ID, and I had those relationships with some of the instructors. So it came in well there. The key thing, and I didn't need to be reminded of this, but I was standards and discipline matter.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes other services don't get a pat on the back for that. I can tell you, the Army deserves a pat on the back for the standards and discipline of the soldiers that ran that course. They were exceptional. 3 hours and 1 second, you were gone. Because we literally had about 30 minutes after that graduation, we marched right down. I've got a photo here in my office of me getting my air assault wings getting pinned on. I can't wear them, but I did that day.
Sure.
My Marine Corps first sergeant and Army commander pinned them on me. Great pride in the fact that I finished air assault school with those soldiers, graduating out there in the rain and the mud. It was really great training. And I think it led me later to have a little bit of credibility in the joint force because I could speak that language. I had embraced shared hardships with those soldiers and understanding those. And so it was always one of those things where, given an opportunity to go to a school, I was going to jump on it. I didn't get all the opportunities I would have loved to have had to some of the cool guys' schools, but once I had that opportunity, I was jumping all over it.
Yeah, I'll bet. I have a very similar. I shared experience with you on that, with learning a lot from those Army schools and the accountability and the standards. And you met them or you didn't. Same thing at Jumpmaster School. The cadre were incredibly professional. I think we as a service tend to poo-poo the other services, and some of it's for fun. But boy, I'll tell you, all the experiences I ever had with them were amazing. And the reason I was kind of interested in your comment was because you made a comment earlier about how you're kind of a stickler for terminology when we were talking about advisor or leader. I think a lot of that comes from these Army schools. I mean, because they are such a stickler for terminology. And I just think that kind of changed my DNA. And I'm the same way you are. I'm a stickler for the
Yeah.
terminology because words matter, I like to say. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to spend the last 30 minutes that we have here on really getting some insight from you on your preparation for retirement, your retirement, and then your follow on, and from a leadership perspective. And let's start by this. Let's start by asking this. When you look back over the last 12 months that you had on active duty, what were some of the lessons that you learned about personal responsibility for preparing for retirement? And also, what advice would you give to somebody who's in month one of their 12 months remaining that you wish you had done differently, or advice of things that they should be doing that you didn't do?
I was very fortunate to have and still have friends who told me what to do. Didn't ask me. They told me, and I'll say that they all told me you need to start 24 months out.
Okay.
And that sounds, wow, I just got to my unit. I got a year in. You want me to start preparing for retirement? I think we can chew gum and walk at the same time. Now, granted, not in uniform, but the analogy being you can do both. I will tell you, I had my retirement ceremony on a Monday. The Friday before I retired, I was in my office till 8 p.m. I took great pride in making sure that until the very last moment, my rucksack was on as tight as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the Corps was calling me, whether Space Command, they're going to ask me to do something, never retired on active duty. However, that doesn't mean you can't prepare. And so 2 years into it, I really started talking to fellow veterans who have been there and done that. I took a lot of notes and I set forward on a plan just like anyone would do in uniform. You need to take that hill. Roger that. Here are the things we need to do to prepare to take that hill. You need to get ready to teach a class. Roger that. Here's the things you got to do to teach a class. Same thing. And so what everyone told me, no matter who I talked to, it wasn't, hey, make sure you got the perfect resume. Hey, make sure you get this degree. Hey, make sure you do that. It was have a strong network. And so I ended up creating a LinkedIn profile. I'm on LinkedIn now and really just getting an opportunity to share my story, telling, and I was focused heavily on helping others, predominantly making sure they understood the process, whether it's going to medical, which isn't that going to medical is hard. But when you're getting ready to retire and preparing for that final physical, you'll often go and say, hey, I've had this nagging issue with, pick a part of your body,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets looked at. And the reason why you need to start this 2 years out or at least a year out is because they'll find something there, and that will lead to 3 more appointments.
Mm-hmm.
And it could lead to something else. And so time is critical. And so I was heavily focusing on making sure I was sharing my experiences on LinkedIn, getting guidance from those who have done it before, and building a strong network. The day I retired, my ceremony on the 7th of August of 2023, the next morning, my wife, my 3 daughters, and my dog, we packed up the minivan and we left. I didn't have a job, I didn't have a vehicle, and I had no worries either, because I know I had put in all this work to network. And slowly, as we're going to different national parks, Mount Rushmore, Yellowstone, and all the places that I wanted to go, and not have to worry about it getting a phone call or anything like that as I executed terminal leave, I started getting phone calls. Hey, Master Guns. Hey, Scott, we would love to consider you for this or for that or whatever. And I had a few trusted individuals that I have signed on to do work with that I would ask them to look this over for me and prepare. All the way before that, I had built my own company, S2 Stalker Solutions. I had prepared everything on LinkedIn. I did the things that I needed to do. So literally 8 days after I've completed my retirement, the VA has come back with my disability rating, because I had started that process early. And some of these things are unheard of, but it's really having a strong plan, executing that plan, knowing that when you wake up in the morning, you truly can do whatever you like. And I love retirement. I miss the Corps. I miss the Marines. I don't necessarily miss the 2 and 3 hour meetings we'd often have
Yeah.
via PowerPoint, but I'm able to be successful as a retiree, as a veteran, and to give back to the Corps on some of the boards and some of the things that I do now, because I had a plan in place and I executed that. And I learned and shaped and changed throughout as okay, I'm learning something about this. I got to change the way I'm executing my retirement plan. And so it was always about the network. It was always about preparing, and then talking to folks that are in business. Hey, what are the things I need to do? What is this thing called an S Corp? What is an LLC? How am I going to do taxes? How do I get a CPA? I had never had to do that as an active duty Marine.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to do that since, and I'm a bit of an expert. I'm not the expert, but I understand it well. And now I've got different Marines at different levels, and members of the Joint Force that'll call me and send me a note and say, "Hey, Scott, I'm getting ready to do this. What do you think?" And I take great pride in being able to help them. But no one should retire from the Marine Corps, from any service, without having a plan in place, without having an idea of what they want to do, whether it's nothing, whether it's an awful lot. I have taken on an awful lot. I can tell you, I'm probably busier now in an effective way, more than I was on active duty, just for the sheer fact that I wanted to take on an awful lot, and I love work and I love the grind. I love solving hard problems, but it came to the network. Never once did I submit a resume to anybody. Always they would call me and say, "Scott, we know your professional reputation. We would love to have you consult for us on this problem. What do you think?" Some of them I said, "No, thank you." Many of them I said yes to include a couple boards that are nonprofits that I just volunteer my time with and help where I can. So it has been a tremendous experience. But had I retired on the 7th of August and not done all that work, I would have been freaking out on the 8th of August, not having a job, not having a place to live. We didn't buy this home that we're in now here in North Carolina until several months into our terminal leave. And it was because we had a plan in place. We had a financial plan so that we can support ourselves. And now we're really living the dream. We truthfully are. And part of that dream is giving back and helping others where I can.
That's fantastic. And congratulations on your career and your retirement and all the success that you've had.
Thank you.
And your advice is sage. But the thing that I get concerned about too, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, it's the mental aspect of, I don't know how to put this the right way, but almost like we have this, like the unselfish leader. And at some point, you've got to become a little bit selfish about yourself to get those things done that you need to get done with your medical appointments and your VA appointments and everything else. Otherwise, you could be unselfish up until the day you get out, and then you have you have made a massive mistake in terms of preparing to get out. And I'm wondering, is there something that leaders can be doing now to help those people who are getting ready to retire to be more responsible for themselves? How does a leader impress upon somebody to say, look, it's time to stop being unselfish and start taking care of yourself. You are, to your point, 24 months out or 12 months out. Do leaders need to hear you say that or someone else to say that, or are leaders doing that?
I really believe in the idea of mission first. I get it. Again, we joined the Corps didn't join us, but I think you can do both. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to believe that I effectively did both, where there was never a moment where my team didn't need me, my commander didn't need me, the Joint Force, the Marine Corps, whether I had to travel or get on a call or whatever. And so if you plan this properly, if you do that, you can do both. And so I did have a leader, God bless his soul, Lieutenant General Vince Stewart, who in many ways is responsible for much of my success in the latter half of my career. He was also going to be my retiring officer, and unfortunately, he passed before then. But he would text me and say, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Like he was a very direct kind of guy. What the hell are you doing? You need to be preparing for this. You need to be focusing on this. And it was the necessary pivot of mindset that I needed. Again, not that I was like select all delete on my emails and not responding to anyone at
Mm-hmm.
work, but he's right. The first half of my day, I needed to go set aside some time to get the medical done. I think it's harder to do for those that are in uniform and be advised by those that are in uniform because they've never done it. And so, what I think folks that are in uniform and they're seeking advice on how to do this, nothing wrong with talking to, your sergeant major, your commander, master gunny, whatever, but they likely have never gotten out of the Marine Corps. They likely have never retired from the Marine Corps. You need to talk to those that have done this and understand and done it successfully, right? Because a lot of people have done it. Doesn't mean they did it well.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to people that have done it well, who really embrace the challenges and the opportunities that are out there, and have had great success, and talk to those individuals, because I'm convinced at whatever echelon you're at, you can do both. I just attended General Nakasoni's retirement. I don't know if there's a person in uniform who was busier than him. He was the director of the National Security Agency and at the same time the commander of the United States Cyber Command. Pretty big deal.
Yeah.
He was able to retire, and the building didn't collapse last I checked. So no one is irreplaceable. The mission will always come first, but you can do both if you plan this out. Now, if you come to your commander or your leader and say, hey, I'm getting out in 3 weeks, man, now we've got a challenge. Now we got some problems. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's thinking deeper in life and planning things out. Even in retirement, quite frankly, I have an idea of where I want to be in 15 years and rowing back to that, how I want to get there, because a lot of these things don't happen overnight. And being successful in the corporate world now is where my focus is. It'll always be on helping others. If anyone ever reaches out to me in uniform, I'm going to take that call. But now I've got to be successful in business. I've got to be successful as a business owner for my family and ensure that my daughters have opportunities in the future. And so you kind of pivot there. And so my mentors tend to be those that have done that are out of uniform and done
Mm-hmm.
that. Otherwise, I'm going to talk to someone who has the same inexperience level as I do.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. And you're right. First of all, welcome to the civilian world. Welcome to, the next part of the rest of your life. It's super exciting to be out and be
Yeah.
doing things and leveraging everything that you learned in the Marine Corps or any branch of service for a listener, leveraging all of the things that you learned in order to be successful in a different part of your life. And I would have never been able to start and run my own company. That's what I do, my real life.
Right.
Had I not been a United States Marine or a member of any of the branches of the armed service, it's not just because I was a Marine I was able to do this. It was, the ability to have confidence. It's all the things we learned. I don't even need to say them that were really, really instrumental in setting me up for my successful part. I'm really glad to hear, and I really hope what listeners take away from this is that you planned out your retirement, you planned out all the things you needed to do, and you had a good experience. It had your VA claim and everything done. Because I don't think everybody has that same experience. And LinkedIn, like you were talking about, is such a great place for people to be sharing information and experiences. I've learned so much on LinkedIn just from reading people's posts, yours included. I'm learning things about what the VFW is doing and not doing. I'm learning about what other people's challenges are in the VA. I am learning about things that you're talking about There are people out there who, and now you have to pay them. That's the hard, and that may be a hard part of transitioning, is realizing that you have to pay people for their experience in the civilian world. And you can't just walk into somebody's shop and say, show me how to do this, and they'll help you because you're a Marine. But just starting up LLCs,
But there's a lot of free tools out there.
a ton of them,
Yeah.
a ton of them.
Yeah.
I will take a quick commercial here and just say to the people who are listening, whether you're active duty or reserves, the one ticking time bomb you have is your final physical. Like, you have to have all of your stuff that's wrong with you documented. You need to have a diagnosis done on what is wrong with you in your medical records. Because once you're out, it's way more difficult to deal with that stuff with the VA. And if you're a reservist, here's the thing about the reserves. You may not know this, Scott, but when you got off active duty, you got a DD 214. And it says you're on active duty from this time to this time. And that's how the VA knows when you served. If you're in the reserves, you have your DD 214 from when you were on active duty. I have my DD 214 from when I was on active duty. There is no DD 214 in the reserves. You just get out. You just retire. So the only way the VA knows that you served is your medical record. That's it. They don't even understand unless you can show them that form out of your medical record that says, I was injured during this 2-week AT at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They have no record of your service after your DD 214 coming off active duty. So prepping that way is super important too. Like, just having all of your stuff organized will make your life, and you did, which is the point I'm trying to make. Like, spend the time to organize yourself before you get out.
So in that specific case, we all have different situations. It was challenging for me doing this as a Marine in a joint command where there's no real Marine Corps admin.
Great point. Yeah.
However, I've got great relationships with a lot of the sergeants majors that are out there. And I was fortunate to be put in the senior leader branch, MMSL. And so I had a sergeant, shout out to Sergeant Benavidez. She took care of me, emailed me when I was slacking. She would email me and say, hey, get your stuff together. She didn't exactly say it that way, but that's what she meant. And up to the last day, I remember I had a correspondence with her. I said, hey, I got 2 days left. Anything? She said, Master Guns, you're good to go. And I knew I was good to go because she told me I was. And so, but your situation is different, right? As a reservist, we got folks in the joint environment. We got folks that are not near, that they don't have an IPAC. They don't have an administrative section. So you have to understand your unique situation and put a plan in place. There are reservists that have retired before. There are reservists that have gotten out of the Marine Corps before. If you are in that situation, reach out to them. Use the tools available, the free tools that are available, and have those conversations with them. I found LinkedIn to be a really good tool, and it led me to other opportunities, not just going through the executive transition course, but also a couple of others. My time at SOCOM at MARSOC allowed me to go through the Honor Foundation, which is a great program that helps me through the transition process. I also went through American Corporate Partners, which required me, on weekends and late evenings when I wasn't in the office, to be meeting with a mentor who is in business, who I still talk to this day. So there's a lot of things out there. There's also a lot of excuses, and you can pick which one you want, because the world's going to go on. At some point, you're going to hit your EAS, whether you do 31 years like me, 4 years more, whatever. I would just urge people to take control of their destiny, to take control of their opportunities that are out there. It is a beautiful world as a retiree. There are so many things. It feels like the grass smells a little greener and the sun feels a little warmer. I don't know why that is. The sunshine is great, but it's not going to be that way if you haven't planned and if you have all of the stress of not thinking about your future. And I'll tell you, just because I was a senior E9, and I've seen this with general officers as well, don't think that people are just going to knock on your door and offer you a lot of money just because you were a cool person in uniform. You've got to be able to have networked. You got to be able to show value, because these companies are trying to make money. And if you can't bring them the business, if you can't offer them value, they're probably not going to bring you on. Some folks, can get by with their face and their Rolodex for a brief amount of time, but at a certain point, you've got to bring some skills and some of that leadership that you learn in the Corps. Dave, I will forever be grateful to the Marine Corps. It wasn't a perfect 31 years. I had, a challenge or two, but by and large, I am so grateful to the Marine Corps. I don't have any tattoos on my body, but the EGA is tattooed on my soul because of what I learned and the leaders I learned it from. Yeah, I was pretty good at being an intel guy and doing those things, but it was more on the leadership and the character that I take most pride in than the fact that, I can give a decent intel brief or provide, information to a commander. It was always on the other side of things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you're right. The civilian world is brutal with accountability because everything gets measured in dollars and cents and profit and loss. Nobody gets to stick around if they're a drag on the system. I've seen more people fired in a year in the civilian world than I ever saw fired in my entire career in the Marine Corps. And if you just think that you can get in there because you're a veteran or somebody owes you something, it just doesn't happen. And if you slip through the cracks, somebody's going to find you out really quick and you're going to get fired. People get fired fast. There's a saying in the civilian world, hire slow, fire fast. And that happens all the time. I kind of
Right.
saved this question for last, and maybe I should ask that first, but it's a great concluding question. I think it's a great concluding question. You can tell me what you think.
You're
But
judging your own homework there, Dave. You can't do that.
hey, I'm not a pro at this. I'm like bumbling through this podcast host gig,
You're doing great. Thank you.
I'm enjoying it too. So thanks. And thanks to all the listeners out there too. I appreciate all the comments and the encouragement. And I am trying. I like it. So, but here's the question. Master Gunnery Sergeant, why you for Command Senior Enlisted Leader position? Like, how did that happen? And should other master guns be excited about that or scared about that?
Fear is a great tool to answer that piece of it. I think fear lets you know you're alive. And often if you're afraid, it's because you care. It's the same thing with when some people, when they get on a stage, if they're nervous, I tell them all the time, that's a good thing. That means you care. How did this happen? Well, first, it initially happened. I was at MARSOC, and I developed a relationship with the director of Marine Corps Intelligence, then Brigadier General Vince Stewart. Later in his career, he became the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. There wasn't going to be anyone short of maybe the commandant at the time who was going to tell that 3-star who could or could not be his senior enlisted leader. He just told me, he said, Master Guns, you are my guy. I know the Corps is going to lose their mind. You're not a sergeant major, but you're what I need for this situation. And they had just gone through some challenging times at DIA. You can look at the moment in history where one of the director had been relieved, and not going to get into the what and why on that, but it happened. And so we had that relationship, and he wanted me to be his senior enlisted leader. And in many ways, it probably should have ended there. However, timing is critical in everything we do. And it just so happens that the United States Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, the 4-star senior enlisted leader position, was opening up then. And I was in a meeting. The sergeant major of the Marine Corps was there, and he had sent that out to the sergeants major community, which is how it always had been. Traditionally, we know that it always had been that way, that they're going to compete for it, either get the job or not, based on the performance of their interview. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I don't know if I'll ever get another opportunity to do this. And so I asked Sergeant Major Marine Corps Ron Green, who's now a really good friend of mine. I said, Sergeant Major, I'd like to compete for that if you don't mind. And he said, do you think you can win? And I said, Sergeant Major, I am your best option. And he said, all right, give me a day. And he did whatever he did from there. I think he probably, had to fight off some sergeants majors who thought he was crazy. But he called me and he said, Scott, you're our guy. Get your package in. And so I interviewed. I obviously got the job through that interview. And then later, as I mentioned before, I got the opportunity to interview for United States Space Command with General Raymond, who was our first chief of space operations, but he was also the commander of Space Command. And I interviewed for that. And honest to God, I thought, no doubt, I'm the throwaway COA. There's no way a Marine is going to be at Space Command. That just, that's a funny movie, right?
And scary for the Space Force Guardians, I think, right?
Yeah, maybe so. I think there was some, and probably when I left, there was a little bit of relief because they could breathe again. But in all seriousness, I was afforded those opportunities. To your more important question, this is a moment. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think there's going to be many that disagree with me. But if we're truly talking about best athlete, if we're truly talking about equal opportunity, if we're truly talking about being a MAGTAF leader, and what I believe is talent utilization, it should not necessarily be in those joint positions, whether you're a master gunnery sergeant or you're a sergeant major. It should be who is the best athlete for that job. And we still don't do it the way that, in my perspective, Ron Green and Troy Black in those one-offs with me allowed others to do that. But I can tell you, I still know him. I knew a master gunnery sergeant who had his PhD in cybersecurity, who could rewrite any code you can think of, who was just brilliant at it. But because he wasn't going to be afforded an opportunity to move up, he just did a couple of years as master guns and he retired. We lost his talent because we didn't utilize it appropriately. We didn't allow him to compete for other things and take on newer challenges. And at a certain point, if we continue to do things the way we've always done them, I think that's why you see oftentimes we don't get these opportunities in the joint world. And so I don't think we need to fundamentally change the structure of the Corps, but it'll be a shame if I'm the only master guns that have been able to serve at a combatant command, because I know many of them and they're far smarter than I am. They're better leaders than I am. They're more equipped and prepared to do these things as well. We got to put our money where our mouth is and say, you're going to get an opportunity. That's all I ever wanted, was an opportunity. And I knew that the Marine Corps had trained me well, had led me well, and I was going to serve them well. But I think the model that we have today probably is due for a relook. And oftentimes, did we get it right? And here's an example. So when I initially was getting ready to leave Space Command, if you go back in history a little bit here, probably about 9 months ago now, who was the first person selected to replace me?
Sergeant Major Ruiz.
Yeah. And so people say, oh my God, we're going to put a sergeant major in here. He is the best athlete. He is the right guy. And so and it didn't matter what my opinion was because the commander selects and I support. But my point is, I was good with that from the get-go because I knew Carlos. I know how exceptional he is as a leader, how brilliant he'll figure out this space thing, right? We sent him to a course. And so I'm kind of flipping my argument there by saying sergeant majors are the right person if they are the best athlete we have. But also there's often times where it's going to be a master gunnery sergeant as well. And we need to truly put our money where our mouth is so that those other opportunities are going to be there. And I look forward to seeing a moment in time where another master guns is a combatant command C-cell or, something significant like that, because I know we can do it. I mean, you look at all the special operators we have, the CSOs we have out there today. You're telling me those master guns couldn't serve at SOCOM as a C-cell? I know them. They could.
Right.
And I think they deserve an opportunity as well. So I'm just a believer in best athlete. You see it in the business sector, right? If I come into an organization today and a company today and I make the most sales, I am the best salesman, period. Or if a woman does it, then she's the best saleswoman. We don't say, well, you got to go this way and this way. You're number one because you performed. So that's kind of, how I think we probably need to relook at that on the joint side, especially.
Yeah, that's a fascinating answer. Now I changed my mind. I'm glad I asked that question last.
Awesome. I thought you were going to throw another curveball at me.
No. Curveballs are over.
No, it's really what got you there won't get you there, right? And so we should not continue to say this is the model, this is the only way. We can never redesign it. When we did talent management review, the people that really led the talent management review are those that have had an opportunity to lead in the traditional roles, the commanders and the sergeants majors. And I know some others were allowed to be a part of that conversation, but I just think we really should look at, the future battle space here, the future operating environment. And with space and cyber and the information environment and intelligence, there's going to be times where sergeant major is the right leader. There's going to be other times where potentially the master gunnery sergeant is the right leader. And let me go back to the very first thing I said. Those are my opinions. Again, I joined the Corps didn't join me. And so I offer those up as suggestions. If the Corps decides not to take those, that's fine. And I don't have any ill will towards the Corps nor towards any of those leaders. I just believe it's something that we probably should look at. And the people that are looking at it need to be those that don't necessarily benefit for the current system if we're going to truly invoke any level of change.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I hope to accomplish with this project is just to get people to think about things differently or hear different perspectives or consider things that they've never considered before. And so thank you so much for your time. And actually, thank you for concluding with that, because I think that may have been one of the most powerful sections of the whole podcast. I know you're looking at me right now. You have what I call podcast blackout. You don't remember anything that you've said. I know what your look is saying to me right now, but I think that may have been one of the best parts of the whole episode. We'll both have to go back and grade ourselves on it, but
I thought it was the leeches. We'll see.
Yeah, it was great. So, and
Okay.
congratulations on a great career. congratulations on being super excited about the next part of your life. I think that's awesome to see. I'm excited for you as well, and look forward to staying in touch with you. And I look forward to hearing about your successes on the outside. I hope that your experiences that you've shared will help other people achieve a level of success